Thank you for coming to this lecture. Today, this morning, we are very pleased to have internationally renowned interior designer and architect, Colin Seah from Ministry of Design. And yeah, applause, yeah. Just to give you a quick background of Colin, he's architecturally trained in the US and licensed in Singapore. Colin Seah honed his sensibilities working for the likes of Koolhaas and Daniel Libeskind. He also spent 4 years in the National University of Singapore's Department of Architecture, researching design pedagogy and serving as design critic. As MOD's founder and director of design, Colin has been named Designer of the Year by International Design Awards USA 2010, and is a 2-time recipient of Singapore's highest design accolade, the President's Design Award. He's also a 3-time Grand Prize winner of the Gold Key Award, the highest international hospitality accolade, named Hong Kong Perspectives 40 Under 40 Architects, and Marcus Corporation Foundation Prize 2007, Emerging Architects with Potential for Greatness, and recognized potential. More to come, and recognized as Rising Star in Architecture by Monocle. Colin Seah has been a juror for the inaugural Design Awards, a global advisor for leading services manufacturer Cosentino, and invited by the Singapore Tourism Board to redefine Singapore as a destination for 2020 and beyond. And these are just tip of the iceberg. Colin has really achieved a lot beyond this, and I strongly encourage all of you to, visit his website and check out all the amazing works that Colin has done. And also, we actually recently did an extensive interview with Colin. So after the lecture, if you're intrigued by Colin as a person, go to studiosml.net and you can find Colin's very long interview with us. Yeah, I'm sure you'll enjoy yourself. And in the meantime, please, a big warm welcome for Colin.
Thanks, Kelly. Actually, Kelly didn't mention one of my glowing accolades includes being a critic at LASALLE several times. Yeah, some of your seniors probably have nightmares about me still. Okay, so Kelly says I'll be invited back, so maybe I'll be in your nightmares one day soon. But thank you for having me, and I was just looking around, right? The demographic here is like 80% female. Did the guys just not come, or is that the way it is in the cohort? Is it really just more female-based? Wow, okay. Generally so, huh? Okay, because when I was teaching in the NUS, it started out more male-centric, and then by the time I left, it was 50-50 female. So I guess it's a different demographic here. Great. Are these lights dimmable? Can we do like just the first row off or something like that? Cool. So this is a really casual sharing. As you can tell, I'm in a t-shirt, no jacket, sitting like a boss. Hello. You see, even this group, one guy and all girls. And bookended by another guy. What, your security detail, is it, the guys? You're here to escort the girls around, is that right? Okay. Here they are sitting here very silently like Secret Service agents. Anyhow, great. So, as you can see, the title is just made of a whole bunch of acronyms, I guess because in Singapore we're so used to that. I'll explain what QDR is, and of course you know what OMG is. But today, given you guys are aspiring designers, and some of you will become designers, some of you might even run your own firms one day, I thought it would be great to not just share the typical stuff like, theory of design or concepts, etc., but to also share some things which may not be so obvious, and maybe they don't teach you in school because there's not enough time, or maybe they just don't want to in case you get scared off and quit. But I'd like to share some real life stuff with you as well, okay? So it prepares you mentally a little bit for the real world to come. All right, so this will be our format today. We'll have 4 categories. We'll start with finding your voice. And each category speaks to a different thing. So the first one is really just about who you are as a designer. The second is some examples of works that the firm and myself have done together. And 3 is where I share with you some realities of the practice and realities of being a designer. And 4 is where you can be perfectly candid and ask me whatever I want. And chances are I will answer you quite honestly as much as I can. Okay, how's that sound? Good? Okay, great. So, why is this important, finding your voice? What do you all think it means, finding your voice? Secret Serviceman? Quick, what's finding your voice? What do you think it means? Go. Throw it out there. Okay, they have not clearly they have not found their voice yet. Anyone else found their voice? Okay, what do you think it means? Shout it out, people. Yeah? Say that again. What?
Finding your own style.
Yeah, finding your own style. I think finding your own style is definitely one way of translating what finding your voice is. And style is definitely one important aspect, so thanks for sharing that. But what we'll discover in a second is that finding your voice could mean a very, very different things for different people. But it is true that you need to locate something deep inside, because if you don't have something that drives you or obsesses you, you know what? You'll be plain as vanilla. And in a sea of 100 folks like this or 200 folks like this, why would I come to you? Why would I go to these Secret Servicemen to design? They can't even, speak in a crowd like this, right? They don't even have a point of view, at least not now. Maybe at the end of the talk, they'll be willing to share their point of view. Come on in. Yeah. Hey, Cal, can we leave a box there so that everyone who comes in late puts $1 in? Then we can use it to buy our lunch later. Yeah. Chop, chop. Also, right, a point to note, if you ever end up designing auditoriums in the future, absolutely do not have your main entrance in the stage elevation, because this is what happens. People do not come on time, and that's just natural, right? Or people have to use the toilet halfway, and then you're going to have to walk through like this. So, okay, real life note number 1, do not design exits and entrances to auditoriums where the speaker is, because it's kind of embarrassing for everybody. Welcome. Yay. Yes, you're in the right place. Oh, did you think this was the how to get 100 marks in your design module class? Great. Okay, great. So back to the notion of finding your voice. It's so important that you really work on it right now, because it starts when you're young. It starts when, okay, look, I need you to focus here, okay? Yo, guys, focus here. It's okay. You probably ended your class late. It's all right. We're just glad you're here. So I'm starting with this because I can just tell you, quite honestly, when I was in your shoes, a number of decades ago, there are already many competing voices in the design world. People with some obsessions that drove them and made them unique. But as every year went by, and as every year goes by, the number of distinct voices becomes exponentially more. You're a graduating class of, I don't know when, because you're from all the different years, right? So you could be graduating next year, you could be graduating in 4 years' time. But you know what? By the time you graduate, there'll be so many designers out there, and they will all be interested in so similar things that you won't be able to stand out at all. So if you have to take away one thing at all from the talk today, I really strongly say, burn this in your mind, that if you don't find something that obsesses you in a really deep way, and even as a start, that obsession doesn't mean anything. It only means something if you drive it deeper. and you develop it over the years, because your obsession is probably a generic one right now, and then by the time 10 years or 15 years development, maybe you'll have a unique voice, but it's not going to become unique straight away. So today is the day that you start planting that seed, and thankfully, many of you, I'm quite sure, I was just kidding about you guys, by the way, I'm sure you already have some notion of a voice. And I'm saying to you, you need to keep feeding that voice and feeding that obsession. And what is your obsession? So our friend over here talked about style, right? But can I just tell you quite bluntly, style is completely ephemeral. Style will disappear and change and evolve and be insignificant and irrelevant the minute it becomes a style. Like, how many of you are into fashion? You know that it changes all the time, right? And so that's the thing with style. If you're obsessed by a particular style, good luck to you, because rest in peace, that style is going to die fairly soon. And that is just the lifespan of styles. That's why it's a style. If it's not a style, then you would call it a classic, or you call it a fundament, or you call it a standard, right? But because it's a style, it doesn't last. So these are some categories that you can think about framing your obsession around. And when I say think about, I'm not saying, oh, you go and pick something and choose something. I'm just merely pointing out that the world and the breadth of what you can be obsessed by is so wide, much more than just the superficial qualities, although very attractive, of style. Okay, you hear me? So aesthetics would probably fall into what some of you are thinking about as style, but aesthetics is so much more. Aesthetics is the whole science and art of creating something that has balance or contrast or beauty or purity. Aesthetics is an art form. It's not just a style. Style obviously subscribes to the notions that are embodied in aesthetics, but that's not all. Okay, what are provocations? Anyone want to guess what provocations are? What is it when you say to provoke someone? What do you mean by that? Anyone? Yeah, okay, it excites you. That's a very positive way of framing it. What other provocations can there be? Yeah, you could just piss the hell out of someone, maybe for a good reason, maybe because someone needs to be nudged out of a certain comfort area. So you could excite, you could irritate, or you could nudge them out. So provocations are things, right? When you are provoked, what do? Is this the posture of someone who's provoked? Right, what's the posture of someone who's provoked? Like this, right? So if finding your voice means you're interested in provocations, then you're interested in arresting someone for that moment, for whatever reason, in whatever way. Materiality. Materiality is huge. Why is it huge? It's not just, oh, timber, I like stone, feels very warm. No, materiality is huge as a potential obsession. Why? Because how many trees are there in the world? How many quarries are there in the world? How many houses need the trees and the quarries? Much more than there are trees and quarries. And it will all run out, right? So materiality actually is not just something that you see, touch, and makes you feel good, which it is, and that's really important, but it's also something which is completely essential for the furtherment of our entire planet, right? The materials that we use today will be very different from the materials that we use tomorrow. You're talking about synthetics, you're talking about things which are man-made that last much longer with performances that are much better, or otherwise, and you could be part of that, right? You could be part of that material conversation. Narratives. What are narratives?
Story.
Yeah. That's a wonderful way of summarizing what a narrative is. It's definitely story-like in nature, but narratives are really about weaving content in a way which strings along things like symbol, things like how someone is meant to react to it in a cultural setting, in a physical context. And narratives are much more than just mute space, right? Narratives use space as its vocabulary. Narratives use space to speak. And so narratives, I'm saying space because you guys are in the interior design department, but many of you will also be thinking about the things in space, the things that space contains, the things that space allows, like music, like culture and art, like smells and scents, like things that you can enjoy through consumption of it, like eating, or even sort of like the act of bathing. All of these things are incredibly strong, and narratives allow us to weave that together to create something that's much more than just space. So stories, fantastic way to start. And you know what? They're good stories, and they're bad stories, and then they're phenomenal stories that last all time and ages. Like, there's some classic movies that you go back to, like Love Actually. Why? Because it's like a story that resonates at such a deep level. So that's the premise of narratives. There can be really bad ones as well. And then on you go. I'm not going to dwell on the rest too much, but just touch on them very lightly. Social justice is a huge narrative. Like, you look at the work of people who try and stop the gap that is ever increasing between the haves and the have-nots, right? Most of you would dream of designing something spectacular for a really rich client, but you know what? Most of the world isn't that. In Singapore, maybe most of us are very comfortable, and some of us are incredibly comfortable, but even in Singapore, there is that gap. And social justice, if you're driven and obsessed by that, space and how you devote of yourself to space. Architects have done that. Kango Kuma has done that. Our local hero, what's his name now? The Indonesian Chinese architect has been doing that in the Ukraine. And all of these acts of social justice are driven and executed through the art of space and architecture. And so this is something that's really important too. It's invisible, but yet it's so critical. Tectonics is essentially not just materiality, but it's how these things come together. Some people can be really obsessed by that, and that's beautiful, because in a world of throwaway consumables, most of you, right, take something for granted that you're going to throw it away. But imagine that you cared so much about the making of something, that you envision it to last for decades, even a lifetime, that tectonics becomes so important. How you put something together becomes so important. Phenomenology is an obsession about how the body responds to the world around us through our senses, our eyes, our mouths, our ears, our fingertips, the nerves on our skin, and how you design spaces that allow for someone to celebrate how their body engages with it. And all of these things are not mutually exclusive. They're all actually incredibly mutually inclusive. And in fact, not one single project will be singular in nature. It will always be a combination of the things. But we're talking about an obsession which drives you, which makes your projects always acknowledge this particular aspect, or aspects if you're multi-obsessed, right, in a way that you push harder than anybody else, that you celebrate stronger than anybody else. Okay? Does that make sense? So start your obsession today. If I ended today and walked away from this class, I still hope that this message will ring through, because I can tell you, most of us at your age especially, because I was there too, we let other people tell us what we should be obsessed about. We let our heroes tell us what we should be obsessed about. We let our culture tell us what we're obsessed about. You need to find that inner voice, because once culture shifts and changes, does your obsession just dissipate and disappear? That would be a freaking waste of your time. You need to find something deeper and anchor it. So my obsession, and has always been, it's through not just my craft in terms of space and building and form, it's also through everything I do. I love installation art. I always try and provoke through it. I love cooking, and my food often is not just about having flavors that taste good, but it's also about challenging certain preconceptions about what cooking should be like in terms of the strict division between Western or Asian cultures, the strict usage of certain ingredients a certain way. And provocation has always been my thing. How was it my thing? I think in a way I was born like that. In a way I was in a surrounding and setting where there were things that I was uncomfortable with, and I just didn't let it sit. I didn't say, okay man, this is the world, let it be. No, I said, I'm not comfortable with this. I want to do something different. I want to say something different. I want to try something different, right? And not just difference because I was a rebel and say, oh, up yours, you know, I'm going to do something different. But no, it's something that's not comfortable. I know there's a better way to do this. I know there's a fresher way to do this. And that's what drives me. Is that what drives you? What drives you is the question that you need to ask yourself. And because it's so natural to me to question convention, naturally, when I started the firm, and that's a whole different story, we can talk about it later if you're interested, what happened then? By nature, you bring into the firm who you are. And you hope to God that there is a market and a consumer who also would love to enjoy what you're doing and pay you for it. Because you could love doing something, but nobody wants to do it, right? So thankfully, there were people who were interested in our provocations. Also an issue of the right place at the right time. Singapore was growing, it was developing, it was shedding its notions of what should be and what shouldn't be. And I think I was there at that moment where I could help shape that conversation. In fact, that's where I met Kelly. She was covering this new design that we were working on, the new Majestic Hotel, and we became friends from there. And she said, do you know that this project is going to make waves? And I said, no, I'm just doing what I'm doing because I don't think there's a right way and this is the better way. She said, well, just watch. And thankfully it did. So our mantra is to question convention, to disturb it not in a super rebellious, irreverent way, sometimes, but always in a relevant way. So when we disturb something, we disturb it because there is a reason to disturb it. Come on in, creaky door. It's okay. And then to redefine is simply the outcome of the questioning. And the questioning is super hard, let me tell you this. When you want to provoke, or whatever obsession you're interested in, right? If you get there easily, I can tell you that's probably because you are not getting deep enough. You're not rooted enough, and you're not pushing the envelope enough. If it feels freaking hard, it's probably because you're doing something that's worth it. So my interest is in provocations, and then because we also need to sort of package it in a way where consumers and our clients are able to commercialize it, a lot of it has also drifted towards narrative making, which is something that's really fun to do. Okay, so I hope that was a good start for us today. Not just the focus on MOD and myself, I'm sharing what my obsession is, but really, as we go through these projects, I want you to think about your own projects and what obsesses you now, and then ask yourself, is that enough? Is that a starting point? And perhaps you need to juggle and explore several obsessions at the same time before you arrive at something, but really think about it, sleep on it. Ask your lecturers, do you notice something that makes me unique, sets me apart? Ask your friends, when you see my work, what do you think of? Look around. Who are your heroes? What are they doing? My heroes were very clear. I was obsessed by Koolhaas's work when I was a student, and it totally jived with my desire to provoke and to ask questions, difficult ones, in the face of a lot of opposition. Do you know that Koolhaas, OMA, maybe some of you don't know, was probably the most seminal and influential architectural practice of the noughties. So like anywhere from 1980 to 2000, right? They're probably the most influential. And all the big wigs that you know of today, BIG, Rex, and OBS, Bureau Ole Shireen, BOS, all of these were all ex-OMA staff. In fact, Zaha Hadid was an ex-OMA staff as well. And do you know that OMA has been bankrupted 4 times, right, in their pursuit of provocation? And of the projects they have designed, which are hundreds in nature, for museums alone, probably 50. You know how many were built? 2. So that's the price you pay sometimes for your obsession. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's going to make you different and it's going to set you apart. So today, I'm going to show you some stuff that hopefully illustrates the nature of our provocations, and some of it has kind of a narrative touch woven into it to make it a little bit more consumer friendly. But all the projects I picked ask a certain question because we were uncomfortable with a certain thing. Okay, so I hope that you can see it through different scales, genres, and time frames. We moved abroad to work out of Singapore about 6 years after establishing MOD. And because a lot of our clients were not English speaking, we created this graphic to illustrate the very spirit of question, disturb, and redefine. And I think it's quite universal. When you look at this, you almost get a sense of what we're about without us even having to say a word. And the middle is a lot of swearing because definitely disturbing is very difficult. In a nutshell, we have either built or realized 140 projects over about 18 years. The awards we have accumulated 155. Of course, some of them are multiple awards for one project. And I'm not talking about these awards are all recognized, not the ones that you pay money to get, but these are all jury-based awards. And in accumulation in total, we have designed over, well, 6 million square feet, because some of our architectural projects are very large master plans. And just to show you a little bit, obviously the faces and people have changed over the years, but generally speaking, we have been for the longest time about 30-ish people. And we have moved, and I can talk about this later too, from a model of where we are in a physical office post-COVID to being remote working, to celebrate life and then let people choose their lifestyle, choose where they want to work, but also have a very, very tight and intense creative collaboration. Okay, so the first project I want to show you is this. Oh, the texts have disappeared for some strange reason. Okay, but it's okay. This is the Citibank project. Hold on a second. The slides seem to be... Okay, it doesn't show up when I go to the share screen like this, but the text don't really matter. This project, okay, it doesn't start from the outside either. It's very strange. It jumbles up my text, my slides for some reason. Well, let's see whether this project is the only one that suffers this fate. Hold on a second. Okay, this one is okay for some reason. Okay, never mind. I'll just go back to that one and then we will talk it through. So the provocation here is, you guys know, you guys obviously are aware that in the realm of banking, there are different stratas, right? Most of us, you and I, we just walk into the bank and then withdraw our money, do our stuff, or we do it online. Now there's a tier of people who are ultra high net worth, so you know, they have lots and lots of money and they have so much they don't know what to do with it and they need to grow it, right? So these are ultra high net worth people, and banks often have divisions that cater to these really high net worth people. And the question that we asked ourselves was, every single example of a ultra high net worth banking facility that we saw was the same typical boring marble and chandeliers and lux. And we said, no, I think as a symbol for wealth, especially for the generation that is today. So there are a lot of young people who are incredibly wealthy because they're inheriting it from their parents, and they are going to be the new generation of ultra wealthy individuals. Some of you here today may be in that category too. And suddenly, your relationship with luxury isn't the same as your parents. So we said, how can we redefine luxury in Singapore? And how can we also find a new symbol for luxury that we think is more befitting of how one should think about wealth? Like usually, wealth is thought of as you in the center of it, and you're trying to accumulate as much as you can at the expense of everybody else. That's an irresponsible, socially terrible way to approach wealth, right? It might even plunder the earth, it may be unsustainable in nature. But as luxury brands have shown us, and as many brands have shown us, sustainability and social consciousness is huge. And that's the same in wealth building. It needs to be sustainable. So what we decided to do here was to create, there are a few slides missing, you just see this one, never mind. But it's an atrium space, which is the main landmark space of this wealth management center, where instead of the typical chandeliers and marble, we've replaced it with these gorgeous curated ensembles of botanical lushness as a new symbol for luxury. Why? Because in order to keep a garden growing, it must thrive, it must have the right balance, it must have light, it must have care, it must be loved. It cannot be plundered, right? But at the same time, we are putting it in objects of great beauty themselves, these planters. And these planters are carefully detailed, they're meticulously shaped, they raise and lower themselves in elevation. They're also incredibly sinuous in plan. And it creates a whole bunch of different pockets where you can find spaces to have conversations. And also, it creates spaces where we can create these pods. And these pods are like little buildings, little architecture. You can have full private conversations inside them. Once you close the door, there's a fire suppression system in them. There's an air conditioning system, there's an AV system. It's fully soundproof. It was incredibly difficult to make. Each one of these costs in the 6 figures to just create. And to treat them as little houses, and there are 4 of these, was very important. And this becomes sort of like the symbol of being able to imagine have a conversation here. Instead of your typical meeting room, you're surrounded by green, surrounded by light. And you know what? When you're in a room like that versus a room where it's just your typical no view, no light, but very luxe, the conversations and the tone are very different. So we're very glad to be able to explore that. The other thing that we were exploring was also how do you recast the idea of what happens in a bank. This one has a lot of events that happen throughout the day, and in the night you have launches of things, you have activities for the clientele. So it needed to transform, and in order to do that, we also included this centerpiece where it's a bar object that sits and grounds the experience in the 1-story area before you move towards this really high soaring space. So that's a view of it from the level above. And in the world of this wealth management, there is the high net worth, and then there's the ultra high net worth. And the ultra high net worth, symbolically, in the way we planned it, sit above the high net worth people, all as if lording over them. And they are able to appreciate that garden space, but as a view from above, almost like a godlike thing. Like when you sit in a plane and you look at the land below you, there's this feeling of being quite high up. The materiality, tectonics all change when it's the ultra high net worth floor. You can see, I don't need to go into great detail, but already you sense that there is a difference in the palette and appropriate for the type of people who are sitting here. And that's what we call the envy corner, where you stand and people look at you from below and they envy you and they wish you were there. So in a way, it's a kind of a playful take on also the philosophy and psychology of what it means to be human. In the upper level, the seating arrangements are much more smaller and intimate, and they're also supported by a whole bunch of meeting rooms. The other thing that we wanted to do was to equalize the huge gap which exists in almost all wealth management hubs, where the front of house looks gorgeous, but the back of house is a complete nightmare, where it's fluorescent lights and just normal cubicles. And we said no, we didn't think was a very socially equitable way to treat the colleagues who work there. And we wanted them to also enjoy good space, even though they were serving the ultra high net worth. So the servant and the serve, we wanted to bridge that gap. In a way, a small commentary on social justice. And here we see the workspace for the staff, and we have botanical elements. We worked within the budget that would typically be used for just fluorescent lights and cubicles, but we had to use it, we had to work very smart, and thankfully, because it's COVID, sort of COVID prepared space, it's not catering to the entire head count of the colleagues there. So we could cut down the number of seats, but make each seat more premium. So there are a whole bunch of different ways you can sit, and it's very enjoyable and feels almost as good as the space below in terms of its of the narrative that it's trying to convey. So it's some more examples of that. Sorry, I don't have an image of the outside of it. The slide somehow mysteriously disappeared. Okay, so I have a whole bunch of projects. So I'm just going to fly through them, give you the top line, what we're questioning, and then you can see the results for yourself. This was a co-living shop house that we developed for a brand in Singapore that has multiple, almost like, a couple of dozen shop houses all over Singapore, and they provide a really nice environment for people to co-live together. And we were working on one of these, and it's in a shop house in the Everett Road area. And what's really cool about it is we said to the client, the typical way people see shop houses is always about conserving it or restoring it to its original beauty. And we said we're not interested in that at all, not because it's not interesting, it's highly interesting, but it's because everyone has done that already. Is there another way to see the treatment of a beloved, traditional, old space? And we said yes, potentially. What we do is we keep it, but we layer over it a fresh canvas so that you can begin life as a tenant there on top of the layers of history that precede you. And the way we did it was by highlighting certain key things to showcase them, like the old brick wall or the steps, but only small fragments of it. And then we layered over everything else a layer of white, fresh paint for us then to allow the new generation of people living here, because shop houses are hundreds of years old, to rewrite the history or to write their layer of history upon it, just like a fresh canvas. So that was the concept. You see in these cases also another touch where we bought only pre-loved furniture as a gesture of that notion of reusing layers over time. And so all of these were like from either Garang shops, used furniture shops. We basically didn't design any of the furniture pieces. We just went out and looked for them and then assembled them together. And we did little touches where, for instance, we reveal a bit of the old beneath it and then conceal the rest of it. So everywhere you see hints of that, like that brick wall over there. And we even created this art piece. It's a quote from George Washington where it says, "I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past," which we thought was very appropriate for this space. So that's the public spaces where people share. We also had some fun doing art-like installations where pieces that we loved but didn't really have a place to be located were just hung and used as a screen. And as you walk through the whole space, you see more of the unfurling itself, a detail of the step, lounge area, detail of some of the artifacts, and also the bedroom, and gestures like this where the present casts a shadow of the past, just a small snippet of it. And it looks pristine and white, but what we envision is that the people who move in with their artifacts, with their color, would then enliven the space and write their version of their story over it. Moving on to slightly larger projects, so we have fun working on hotels. We've worked on a bunch of boutique hotels as a staple, but also right now we're working on sort of global brands, which is a lot tougher, honestly, to provoke, because these global brands have very fixed standards. So we tend to find outlets in projects of a more boutique nature. So what we were asking the question of in this particular case was, it's in Penang. It's a hotel that is in a building that looks Victorian and historic, but it's really a new building. But the whole neighborhood is under UNESCO conservation. So there was a desire to obviously respect that past. In Penang, there are basically two kinds of hotels. There's the generic but very nice contemporary hotel. And then there is the restored colonial or Peranakan hotel, which also is very beloved. We wanted to provoke and do something else, which we call transpose heritage. So we take the old as a starting point, but we don't stop there. We transpose it, we transform it into something more contemporary, or our version of what heritage would look like. So that's what we did here. And this time we also, on top of that provocation, added a layer of the narrative. And the narrative was that of magic, and we were inspired by the movie The Prestige, where two magicians have this epic sort of tussle, and one emerges triumphant, but we included a lot of touches here that spoke to the magic. So it's called The Prestige, which we branded as well. And just to give you an example, one of the most famous magic tricks of all time is by this magician called Harry Houdini, where he puts himself in this water, it's a cage, glass cage with metal structure, and he fills it with water and he's inside and he escapes from it. So of course that's a bit extreme, but we were inspired by that vision and created the lobby as an ode to that. So it looks like a glass encased cage, but a large one. And inside, you see the transposition. Like for instance, the counter is this sort of concave stainless steel mirrored artifact, and it looks like carnival, like almost like magic mirrors. The ceiling above has a custom LED neon, which is a translation of like the traditional chandelier. And on the floor, just to be a bit more playful, there's a maze that actually works, and it goes all the way to the middle where the logo is embedded, which we also worked on. So that's a side view of the lobby. The budget was quite an issue for this one because it was in Malaysia, so we had to control that quite tightly. But a whole bunch of other spaces like the conservatory, which is like an all-day dining, indoor-outdoor spaces, and this is also open to the public, of course. And we love the lifts, nice touches like framing with the botanical green behind the wall. And in the lifts, we created this art piece, which was quite tongue-in-cheek. It's a laser etched rear wall, and we worked really hard on it. There are about almost 60 or 70 different symbols that represent Penang's history, either through architecture, food, famous figures, and we created this graphic pattern on the back of the wall, and it's like a mural, but it's laser etched. And the joke was if hotel guests could identify all of them successfully to get a free night stay. Not applicable to MOD staff, obviously, because we knew the answer. And on the top floor, a bunch of public spaces that could be used for events, both indoor and outdoor, the infinity pool. We weren't the architects for this, but we gave the architects many schematic ideas, which thankfully they implemented, including this top floor. And one of the gestures, which was actually the original gesture that provoked the notion of the magic, was long corridors. The building is insanely long. It's like 120 meters long. And the lifts come out, and you're faced with like a 40-meter corridor on either side, right? Because there are 2 lift banks. And in order to break that space up and make it look less monotonous, we came up with this very simple gesture to sort of paint the framing each zone as a different color, alternating, and so it looks like it's like a reflection of the space beyond. And some guests actually walk and like stop at that edge before they walk through it because they feel like it's a reflection. And we installed this rotating light in the middle that would cast shadows in the lighter space, not the darker spaces. So there's this rhythm which broke down the entire length of it. The rooms were transposed heritage with the, you can see the detail on the walls where we use a diagonal language as opposed to the typical one. The rooms are not large. We enclosed the bathrooms, and for a reason, you open them, they are like a surprise. But the shower and sink areas were all open, and you could sort of close them off with curtains. And the room, as a result, felt a lot bigger. There are also suite rooms where in the middle of it, we had a shower block with wardrobe, and there are no curtains. These are really for like couples. And some tongue-in-cheek stuff, like for instance, mirrors where there's a whole mirror wall, but we frame part of the mirror wall with light just to call out a mirror. Surprise botanical aspects when you open stuff. And then there's also a loft room, which is quite nice. So in this case, when you look at it, you go, where is the provocation here? So it's the provocations from varying projects vary in their degree of provocation. This one was, questioning about the notion of either heritage or modern. Can you find an in-between? And also the whole narrative that was woven in. And this is how, in some cases where the projects have to be more customer friendly, we're able to then use the provocations in a way that's a little bit less extreme. We've had the privilege of working on some art and culture projects, and one of them is for the Foss Gallery. It's a very small one, and you've all been to art galleries, right? How many of you went to Art Stage and See Focus this weekend? Some of you? Yeah? Great. One of you, fantastic. If you can next year, try and catch See Focus. a good insight into how regional artists are thinking. But the fourth gallery is a local one. And you know that when you go into a gallery, the problem is it's always this white box that's rather dull. And then if they have to do something else to it, they have to make extra walls, they pay a contractor and they put up these false walls. And then they end the show 2 months, they take it down and throw it away, and it's waste, right? So what we asked ourselves is, can an art gallery really be more than just one space? Could it be 3 in 1? So we created this series of rotating walls that just nicely fit the columns that were part of the space. And you could rotate these walls, and as a result of rotating these walls, you could create a whole series of different spaces, allowing you not to necessarily have to erect new walls and take them down each time. So that was the provocation there. And the object you see on the left-hand side is a reception counter that's on rollers, and it's made to lock into the column, but it could very well be rolled away, rotated, and relocked in the column to change its orientation completely. So that was another way we could play with the space transforming itself. The columns, the walls that rotate, here flat, and then here rotate. This was just to illustrate that it can rotate. In a proper show, it would be rotated and fixed, and then you would walk around it. It wouldn't constantly move like this. Or it could, depending on what you wanted to do. Another provocation was for a retail space. For a client that's very weird, usually, you imagine retail spaces be for fashion clients, for clients that sell, merchandise that you and I would just go and buy or online. But this retailer or this client wasn't really a retailer. They had a business supplying all the shipyards and construction yards with helmets and safety vests and all the safety equipment in Singapore, and they were the largest. And they operated out of this huge flatted factory warehouse space, and they had no showroom presence. And they wanted us to design a showroom for them so that their clients could come and see them there. And we wanted to ask ourselves, could a retail environment be influenced by a highly industrial sort of aesthetic? Because the people who visited this wouldn't be you and me, it would be people who work in a construction site, and they would be much more comfortable with that. And so what we did was, we didn't have a typical display window. We used it as a billboard because the location of this was in a fairly ulu place in the industrial estate. So instead of having tiny things which people wouldn't walk up to, it's not a mall where you're very close in proximity. The building sits behind a road, and then you're driving and you see this. You won't be able to see something so small. So maybe you could see something much bigger. So we use it as a whole huge billboard for this is their logo, DuraSafe, and then the cross rotates. And how do you get into the space? It's a series of walls, a little bit like lenticular walls, but except without the second side. And you walk through it, past the wall and into the space. And inside, it was a kind of like a almost more refined version of a industrial setting. It could be a work site. It could be almost like a warehouse, storehouse. And we use touches like, the production assembly line equipment to create the space. And what's funny is the changing room used these watertight doors that they use in ships to keep the compartments watertight if ever there was a flooding. So these are all the equipment, safety, glasses, and helmets. And in fact, it was so hip, right, that in the end, quite a few fashion magazines even covered the space, and there were young people who were going there to buy like cool rubber boots, white rubber boots, etc. Okay, changing in scale, a couple more projects. So from really large scale stuff, mid-scale stuff, to something that you can hold in your hand. So SG50, we were asked to participate and design a tote bag, which was really fun because, I love Singapore. I'm very grateful to be Singaporean and wanted to capture something about Singapore. And one thing I find as a defining element of Singapore is that it's always busy, it's always alive, it never sleeps. And so this was our design, to create a environment or a little city under construction with the SG50 logo. And we had 2 bags. That was the first. The second one was a bit more cerebral. So the first one is very obvious, even a kid can get it. This one is a bit more cerebral, and it celebrates the constant reclamation that Singapore undertakes. So there are 3 shades of red, the dark, medium, and pinkish. And the dark red is from 1950, and then medium 2015, and then 2015 and beyond. That's what Singapore will grow to become. So we thought it was quite a funny way of showing it. And the lines and the cuts are not random either. They represent most of the major housing estates, like, Toa Payoh, Ang Mo Kio, Bishan, etc. This was what it was like. Not printed on the best quality stuff, but it was really fun that many people actually may have them in their household, which is quite a fun way of thinking. Most of our projects you have to go to enjoy, but this one is in someone's house because they gave them away free. Also on the scale of 1:1, we worked with a Bayan artisan to create a jewelry collection. And this is what the provocation was. Jewelry, when you buy it, you like it, you buy it, you wear it, that's it. We wanted to put the person wearing the jewelry in the seat of a creative. Can you make the jewelry come alive? Can you shape the jewelry based on a few modular pieces? Can you become the jeweler? Can you become the creative? So we created what we call code, and code is a way of, it's named code because I think it's about breaking the code or making your own code. It was based off a tuxedo. Like if you look at a tuxedo and the lapels of a tuxedo, we deconstructed it to become these modular leather pieces, which are easy to join, well, easy enough to join with studs with each other. There are different colors of them, and they're all leather. And this is the starting format, but you can, with different colors and shapes, disassemble it and make it your own. And you can wear it around your chest, you can wear it really tight around your throat. It's meant to be unisex. I've seen guys wear it, very few, but I have seen guys wear it. And then we got a few personalities to also custom what they thought would suit their personalities, and this is what they came up with. And so it's got a very different aspect. And you don't have to wear them all. You can just wear a single piece. You can have a very long piece, like a tie even. So that's a provocation. How can you make jewelry that makes everyone a jeweler rather than just a consumer? And then another provocation was way back for the Singapore Art Museum, and we were asked to design a pencil case or an eraser. I can't remember which came first. I think it was an eraser. It was an eraser. And what we did was, again as a provocation, we said, what's an eraser for? It's to erase stuff that a pencil writes. So there's a relationship, right? Pencil and eraser. But what if the thing that erases the pencil marks also houses the pencil? What if the pencil case was the eraser? And then there's a very uncomfortable relationship, right? Because what consumes and destroys the thing that the pencil makes also houses it and allows for it to exist. So we thought that was quite funny. The whole thing is made of an eraser, so you can use any side to rub. So that was quite fun. And it just, because it's rubber, it just opens and then you put the thing in. Okay, moving back to Penang, jumping scales, I think we have about 3 more projects. I want to show you some architecture, because those were space, some product design and graphic design, and then now architecture. So this project was about wanting to not take for granted what a contemporary building looks like. And in fact, in the face of an old building, what could a new building, how could a new building be formed? So we got a site like this, and it was for a developer to do a show gallery. You know, show gallery where you go and buy a condo. But they had to preserve, as part of the deal for getting this land, the old building that's on it right now, which is a beautiful old building. So we said to ourselves, you know, the typical show gallery is a glass box or a nice-ish box, but it's just a box, right? And it's so generic, and we didn't want to do something like that. So the provocation was, can you treat the old building as the starting point, and not just as a starting point, but you can use it as the way the new building is made. So like when you push dough through a mold and it comes out one single shape, or when you push candy through a mold, could we do that and extend the building? So we needed, like, you know, X number of square meters. We extended the building to X number of square meters, but as you can see, it passes the site, right? It doesn't fit in the site anymore. So in just a series of rational moves, we then twisted, turned it back to fit onto the site, ending up in this U shape. And then now you have two frontages. How do you treat one versus the other? And as you know, and this has to do with building and materials, some tectonics also, old buildings, the rooms are very small. Why? Because the structure has to be very close to each other. They didn't have concrete, they didn't have steel, right? So everything had to be, the spans were very small. You couldn't have a room this size. I mean, not with a lot of difficulty. So the old building, as you can see here, the rooms are all very chopped up and small. But with new buildings, because of steel, lightweight steel, very strong material, you can have a very wide space. So the new building is completely one big open room. And we wanted to express that through a huge empty facade. So like this. And we went as far as to copy the pediments on the old building and extrude them through, and also added these light slits so that you could tell it's not one continuous building, but a series of spaces linked together to make one shape. And then that's the frontage of the other side. A bit too heavy for my liking. I wanted the steel to be a lot thinner, but there was not enough budget to do that. So it had to be these thicker, chunky pieces. But you get the idea, and that's the courtyard that's captured within. So that kind of blurring between old and new. And it was actually quite risky because the town council that had to approve the project said, "What are you doing?" They expected to approve a new building, but then we gave them this kind of like strange hybrid. But after talking them through it, they then, because Penang's town building authority is very strict, they are very, very clear about heritage versus non-heritage. But after we explained it to them, they said that it opened a new possibility for what heritage means in Penang. So we're very grateful for that. And then the space inside, just one large empty space like this. Okay, a couple more buildings. This one, again, I want to explain to you sort of like the provocation and the rationale. Sometimes you don't have to start off with something which is so incredibly worked out. You can start off in a very logical way, and then through your obsessions, it shapes and becomes something else. It's a show gallery again, but this time it's a permanent building which the developers would return to the government to become a tourist information center. So there was a bit more budget to do something more interesting because it's a permanent building after all. There's 3 components. If you stack them in a dumb rectangle, this is what it looks like. But the site is in the middle of a park, was triangulated, so we couldn't fit it into the site. So we had to reshape the building to fit the site, acknowledging where people come from on the left and views to the sea on the right. And so the building was then reshaped to be triangular, but there was no budget to do a second story, and it looks kind of sexy from the sky as a triangle, right? But on the ground, all you see is a flat plane, and if at the wrong angle, it looks like the dullest, most boring block you've ever seen. So we said, how do we then engage with people from a distance, excite them, but also signal the fact that they are entrances and views. So we lifted each corner slightly, like a vertical welcome mat in the sky, and from a distance you can see it makes such a big difference. Where you know where to go, you know where the building is, it's also exciting. And then on the tectonic level, we use metal, cotton steel to be precise, which is a particular kind of steel, which is about 12 mm. The bottom 9 mm is made from rust-resistant steel, but the top 1 or 2 mm is made from steel that is not treated, so intentionally it rusts and gives it this kind of texture, which we felt was really beautiful by the sea with the salty climate for it to age in a particular way. And that's how it looks like at night. And also the view out from the bar inside the middle. And for those of you who are wondering what the interiors look like, it was very funny. They appointed doormen and they dressed them in these sailor outfits because it was by the ocean. And inside, we kept the material palette almost similar to the outside, just a wrap from above and then a simple screed finish at the bottom, and also pick furniture that match the diagonal qualities of the building. Okay, and lastly, jumping scale. So, you know, I said we worked on some very large projects. Not all of them have been fruited, but this one wasn't. It was a proposal which the client really liked, but the government did not approve. And it's about a new way of thinking about the narrative and also the context. So it's a condominium project with some shops at the bottom that was beside wetlands. You know, wetlands are like a sungai below, like a marshland. Very beautiful, but this was artificial wetlands, and the developer had a beautiful piece of land that was right beside it, so you can get this view of the sea, but in the foreground you get this wetland. But our provocation was, let's not just live beside the sea. Many people live beside the ocean, right? You have houses, villas beside the beach. You have, like in Sentosa Cove, you have beachside living, oceanside living. We said we want to not live beside the wetlands. We want to live inside the wetlands. So how do we do it? Conceptually, how do we pull the wetlands in? Well, we did it through a series of water bodies, very low reflecting ponds, I'll show you in a second, and to sort of concretize the notion of going to the wetlands rather than living beside the wetlands, we created a series of bridges that you have to cross every time you entered the development, which means you're never dry land to dry land, you're always dry land to wetland over a bridge. And we also created these circulation paths that allowed you to circulate through the wetlands as part of the internal circulation of the development. The buildings were inspired by the shapes of the wetlands, and so were the elevations, and I'll show you in a second. So that's how that panned out, always crossing a bridge, and that's how it looks like from the sky, but more interestingly, that's how it looks like from the ground. So you get this series of beautiful bridges and waterways, and all of this is just very shallow, very easy to maintain. And if you look at the elevations, they look complex, but really the buildings behind it are completely made of faceted straight glass panels, but creating these cutouts which are more organic in nature by sort of cantilevering ceramic tubes away from the facade. And these ceramic tubes are slightly colored, as you can see, from beige to white. So the whole feeling of living in the wetlands are much stronger. Oh, actually, there's one more project. I did mention Sentosa Cove. I slipped this in because I thought it was a perfect example of a provocation. So in houses, I mean, I'm sure a number of you live in houses or visited your friends in houses. The issue is it's always living and dining at the bottom, right? And bedrooms above. But what happens in Singapore, where houses are so close to each other, the issue is that on the top floors, especially at night, if you're in your bedroom facing the street, you can't have any privacy at all. Like you take a bath, you come out, you're like half naked, but the window is there, the street is there, everyone can see you. So what happens? Everyone ends up closing their windows, closing their curtains, and then you might as well live in a dark box because you're not enjoying any of that view anymore. So for a house in Sentosa Cove, which surprisingly has the same problem, because you think Sentosa Cove is so large, but all the front sea frontage, right, is public land, and you and I, without permission, can walk on it. So if you want to just walk through Sentosa Cove, you can. You just can't drive in it, but you can just walk through it. And so the coast is public. So you look back and you can see all these, millionaires and their houses, and you can look right into them, which is really, really not private. So what we decided to do was to completely overturn that typology. So that's the typical section of private versus public above. We said, why don't we put the spaces where you're not embarrassed to be seen at night in full view above, which is the living and dining, and then put all the bedrooms below. And let's not make it enclosed because it's such a nice view anyway. Let's just make it a floating pavilion above. And in Sentosa Cove, actually you probably don't know this because it's not apparent. There are some buildings that are flat square boxes, very modern looking. But behind those parapet walls of those villas, there's a pitch roof because it's a rule that you have to have a 15-degree pitch in Sentosa. So you see all those like ugly, okay, not ugly, some of them are very ugly, some of them are okay, pitch roof houses. And then you see the square ones. The square ones just hide their pitch roof. So we said to ourselves, we definitely don't want to do a pitch roof house, right? But can we do a multi-pitch roof house so that it adheres to the 15 degrees, but it's completely actually not familiar looking in its presentation. So this actually complies to the pitch roof rule, but it is a completely sculptural roof, almost like an art piece. You see the rear is where you drive in, the front on the seaside is where the public walkway is, and you can tell that the black box below is where the private spaces are. So it's very private, but it opens sideways into gardens. So at night, you can have your curtains completely open. You look out into gardens, very nice. Above, day or night, you get this amazing view. At night, you're not afraid to be seen because it's a public space anyway, unless you like watching Netflix without any clothes on. So that's the view from the front. This is what you would see from the public walkway. And then the bottom part, private area facing the public walkway is a family lounge area, so it's still semi-private. But all the rooms are on the side, so you can't look into them. The client saw this and he said, "I think you're not the architects for me." And we didn't proceed with the project. It was too radical for him, and he wanted something more conventional. So again, like I said, sometimes you really pay the price for your obsession, but I think it's good to be true to it. Okay, last two sections. I want to share with you some thoughts. Those are all projects. I mean, you can find those on my website anyway, but what I'm going to tell you now is not something that you can find on my website. Maybe it's not even something I talked to a lot of people about, but given that you guys are all aspiring designers, I wanted to share with you some realities, not to frighten anyone, but to prepare you so that when you enter the workforce, you are able to navigate without feeling sideswept. So things aren't smooth. You already know that in school, and in fact, this lesson, this particular quip is probably something you're already aware of, even in the context and ecosystem of your school, right? You know that when you have great friends, great partners, people who support you, either teachers or classmates, or even your local supplier, the guy who prints your stuff, right, last minute, "Oh my God, can you print it for me, uncle?" All of these are amazingly and critically important. So because things aren't always smooth, you really need to surround yourself. Don't be humble. Be open to the fact that you are not an island and that you are really part of a general ecosystem. So surround yourself with great partners, whether they are internal partners or external partners, it doesn't make a difference. But the internal partners are even more important. This one here, this one you may not be so aware of, and I'm going to just chat about this a little bit more, because in school, what's standing between you and the A grade? Just your effort, right? And your hard work and your creativity. It's all you. Okay, there's the uncle who helps you print it. There's your professor or lecturer who may or may not like it. But it's really generally just you. However, in the rubber meets the real world, we are completely, and I will not stress this, I cannot stress this any more than I am already, you are completely codependent. And if you don't realize that early, if you don't recognize that the authorities, government authorities, building, if let's say you're an ID person, maybe you won't have to deal with government authorities so much, but you have to deal with the building authorities, right? The building that you are working in, the landlord, the MCST, whatever. The authorities will really make a difference on whether you're successfully able to execute your work. Clients come in all shapes and sizes. Some clients are very straightforward. They tell you what they think. Some clients, you have to read between the lines. They seem so nice, but then they go behind you and they're really thinking something else completely. If you don't read your clients well, if you don't anticipate what they want, if you don't try and convince them in the right way, you know what? Pull the plug, right? Like let's say that Sentosa Koolhaas. Maybe I overstretched, right? And then pull the plug. It's gone. Maybe for you it's okay. Losing a project is okay. Building a portfolio is fine. It depends on which circumstance you're in. But the codependency does not end. It's always there. It's how you want to use it, to flow with it, to gain from it. Builders. You are now the only builder that is needed. You build your own models, you draw your own drawings, you print your own presentation boards. But in the real world, very few of us will also execute what we design. Very, very few of us. Some of my classmates in the States where I did my undergraduate degree, their final project, they actually built it. It was small enough for them to build it. And you know, there's a real hands-on DIY craft culture in some countries. But in Singapore, that's not the case. So your builders, however beautifully you design or detail your projects, in the end, if they're not able to execute it, or if they can't or they won't execute it, that's it. You're completely dependent on them. Others that you may already kind of be aware of, consultants. you know, for interior designers, we often work on the spatial layouts. We have an idea of how the art is or the lighting is, but you, for very big projects, have to work with an acoustic consultant or a lighting consultant. And the lighting consultant doesn't appreciate what you do. You don't have a good relationship with them. They may light your project completely wrong, calling out the wrong things, inadequately lighting the highlights. So all of these things are super important. And then there are consultants which are the unseen ones, the ones that make things work that you don't even appreciate, like the MEP consultants, the structural consultants, and also things like acoustic consultants. And then as we evolve, we may even have sustainability consultants, right? People who gauge the sustainable value of your projects, all sorts of things. And then the last, I mentioned that I met Kelly when during our first project where she was running Ish, right? And media, you're so dependent on media, because if media decide for whatever reason that your projects are not going to be featured, or they feature in a particular way that is not necessarily how you want to, it could make a huge difference. Imagine 6, 7, 8, 9 months of hard work, 2 years of hard work, then you want it to be out there, right? But nobody wants to carry that message for you. Like today, we are slightly less reliant on traditional media because we have social media where you can trumpet your own, blow your own horn, but still they are gatekeepers. And media also influences juries. And whether your project is, you know, selected for shortlisting, etc., hugely dependent on independent media pushing it a particular way as a standard of approval. So that's really important. So you need to understand and know your ecosystem, and then be able to work well within it. If you ever run a design firm, or are part of a team that runs a design firm, or a senior in a firm, but maybe not the owner or something like that, you realize that there's so many other aspects. And some of this might actually excite some of you, because maybe you are very multi-talented and you're interested in different aspects of running a business, but some of this may scare the living daylights out of you. But it's important to know so that you can also position and place yourself. Like for those of you who feel like you have skills in talking and selling ideas, maybe you'll be more heavily involved in the PR or the BD, business development, or the PR of your work and of your firm. For those of you who maybe have a really good way of communicating with others and know how to solve problems easily, maybe you'll be involved in the HR, the human resources, or the PM, the project management of things, right? Because that takes a different touch. If you're like, you know, just a really trailblazing designer with very little patience who are dealing with these other things, then you know what? You need to surround yourself with great partners. So all of these need to be nurtured, not by yourself alone, but with a team of people. So already keep an eye out for this, because in any successful firm, for you to succeed in the long term, all of these things need to be in place, not just good design. This is a really hard thing to admit, but unfortunately, just because you work hard, you do what you need to do, and you do it well, it doesn't mean things will always turn out fairly. And things aren't always fair. Like you could do the really hard work, but a client, for reasons that are selfish, or maybe because they have run out of money and they're in trouble themselves, may not pay you. And you know, you're part of an ecosystem, and the chain of money flows from above to below. You may be somewhere in the middle, you may be somewhere below, but we're certainly not at the top, right? Because we are commissioned to do projects. We're not sponsoring the projects ourselves. So things aren't always fair in payment. Meritocracy, you may be the best, but someone is a friend of a friend, and then that person gets the job. Or you may be the best, but maybe you got a bad media coverage for whatever reason because someone doesn't like you, and then you know you're not appointed. So meritocracy is not always the way we win. Like in school, maybe it is. It's just a grade, but in the real world, it's not always. Sometimes your scope says and responsibilities say one thing, but often clients, just like anyone who is self-seeking, sometimes they tend to push a little bit more and want a little bit more out of you. So you need to know how to negotiate this. So all of these are realities. It's not to reject them all, but it's also to accept some of it and to know when to accept it and to know when it's too much and it's too costly a price to pay and reject it. Sometimes you accept it because it's a step in the right direction. Sometimes, even if you accept it, it's a dead end, so why accept it? Say no and walk away. So my personal philosophy is I'm not in control. There's so much stuff going on around me that I can't really control. I can do my best, but then I have to let somebody else. In my case, I believe there's a God and a divine power behind everything. Do the rest. And try to enjoy yourself in the meantime, because if you aren't enjoying yourself and enjoying the ride, it's a tough profession to be in for the long term. Okay, I don't know how long I've spoken for, but I think it's been quite a while. Okay, I just want to transition this to you guys, for you to think about what's been said, for you to think about your obsessions and what drives you. And if you have any burning questions, fire away. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Colin. Thanks for sharing your works. This is also very an eye-opener for me, because lately when I meet Colin, we're either studying the Bible or eating. And Colin is a really, really fantastic cook. So yeah, I'm very blessed to have eaten your food. And I think what Colin has shared is really valuable to all of you, because you know, as your tutors, we are always talking about your design. Sometimes we nag at you and say, nah, this is not going to work in the real world and all that. And I think today, from what Colin has shared, you realize that really the world outside, it's not easy, okay? So yes, do you guys have any questions to ask Colin? Come, this is your opportunity, because when you graduate, you might want to work for him. He is a completely work from home studio. You don't need to go to the office, you know. It's amazing, yeah. And I just went to Colin's new office recently. It's a workshop. It's sort of like a very cool hot desking area, and all his staff are super happy. Yeah. So you better come and shake his hand later. Make sure Colin remember your face so you can work for him. Yeah, you have a question. Good.
Okay. Firstly, like what you have shared is a very fresh perspective of the industry, because like a lot of us, with experience or not, we know that the industry can be quite taxing and climbing the ladder of experience and like finding our voice. But like when you said about finding your obsession and working on it, like what tips can you give us when we're like, let's say, looking for internship or like applying that logic into like our projects, or even like when we graduate, how can we like find that direction? I don't think all of us would land a vision or a firm where it can actually like give the perfect environments for us to grow for that obsession. So yeah, just like just asking for tips, so how we can start.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good question.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's a very practical question. So for those of you who didn't catch that, the question was tips for how to nurture that obsession, whether it's now or in future employment. Yeah. So I'll tell you, the world's not perfect. Like when I came back to the States from the States to Singapore to work, right, I tried to find a firm that also matched the obsession I had to provoke. I couldn't find one. Doesn't mean that then it dies, but it means that you'll have to keep it alive in another way till you have the opportunity to. And for me, the opportunity was to start my own thing, which also was completely serendipitous. I didn't ever want to start a firm. I was quite happy as a full-time academic. But there was an opportunity to do a project, and one thing led to another, and then the firm began. So it was completely serendipitous. But to answer your question more practically, today, because you're here, none of you are working. Maybe some of you work part-time already. Does anyone work part-time already, like in a design firm? Yeah? Wow. Very good for you. I don't know how you have the energy, because, you know, school's tough, but if you do, that's great. Where do you work? You're a design partner. Oh, okay. I thought, wow, he's interning as a design partner. Oh, that's pretty hot shot stuff, man. You should ask him for tips, not me. I asked that question because I think on the surface, feeding your obsession is a top line thing, right? Let's say my obsession is provocation, then you try and find a firm whose work embodies that, or your obsession is materiality or tectonics, and you try and find a firm that embodies that. However, you also want to try to find a firm where you can not just learn from the mentors or the seniors, but you also want to try and learn from a firm where it gives you the opportunity to also execute, right? Some stuff. And that doesn't, you can't tell from the surface whether that's available or not. Because in some firms, I'm not talking about for interns. Interns tend not to be given terribly important things, right? Because you might drop the ball and then nobody wants to pick up the mess. So that's understandable. But even the colleagues, as your intern, you can ask around. Even the senior colleagues sometimes are very much under the thumb of the director. And if you are that sort of person who likes to sit under the guru tree and learn in a very passive way, you say, I do, I learn, then I do next time. Or you're the sort who wants to be very proactive in your learning, where the director says, this is the big picture, what do you think? Depending on who you are, you need to find that kind of firm. And by doing multiple and as many internships as possible, you can talk to people who work there to find out what the environment is like. So when I worked at OMA, it seems like a very studio that's super about provocation, right? And I went there, I was like, is it really? And it turns out totally. So like the lead architect, who is Koolhaas, who is like in his 60s when I was there, maybe even older, he would ask everybody, like a room, the projects were huge, so it's like, it could be 1/4 of this room is one project team. He'll ask everybody, so what do you all think we should do, right? And then if you are the smallest of interns, but you have a good idea, he'll say, let's explore that further. Amazing, right? So I picked up a lot of habits from there. So in our firm, that's what we do too. In fact, I'm very proud of the fact that often the best ideas do not come from me anymore. They used to once upon a time, but I encourage and cultivate their authorship and voice. But people come to our firm because we work on a variety of things and because we provoke. So that's why they come. And it's very clear what we're about. So you need to find opportunities for like-minded firms, but also ones that give you work opportunities the way you would respond best to. And then on the personal level, use your projects as the vehicle to explore the obsessions that you have. And I'm not talking about just the school projects. I'm talking about make projects, create projects with your friends who are also weirdly minded like you. Today, right, let's say you're interested. In my sense, in my interest provocations, I love art as well, right? Why not go on Insta, find an artist I like and say, hey dude, do you want to do a soft collab on our own? No money, let's just think about an idea. Let's come up with a proposal. I think this part of corner of Singapore has this lobang for this space. Why don't we do something here just as a proposal and then push it, add it to your portfolio. Imagine, right, when you come and see someone like myself or somebody else interviewing for a job and then they say, oh, show me your portfolio. Everyone will say, I have 2 portfolio portions. One is my schoolwork and the other one is my internship work. And then you say, oh, but for me, I have a 3rd one. These are the self-motivated work that I do because I'm serious about X, Y, Z. I'll be like, okay, this person just came up to the top of my pile. You know that I can review a portfolio in 1 minute to see whether the person is good or not. Whatever you put in, right, 3 months of work, I can review in a minute. I can see whether that person has the flair or not. So if you're invited to an interview, how do you differentiate yourself from everybody else? That's how. So push. If it's an obsession, I can tell you, 100%. If you say, hey, Kelly, my obsession is X, Y, Z, and then she says, so what have you done about it? And then you say, nothing, I'm just obsessing about it in my mind. Then it's not an obsession, people. An obsession is that you will spend your extra pocket money to go and buy materials to do that project. Your obsession is that your web searches will be all about that. An obsession is that you will wake up and go, oh, that thing that I was trying to do, how can I do it better? That's an obsession. And it may not just be spatially related, like I said. An obsession typically pervades a wider section of your life. Like even at home, right? Like I cannot imagine that you're obsessed by tectonics at school, but then you go home, your room has got nothing to represent the obsession in tectonics. I imagine that you have designed your own bed or made your own little installation in your room, a bookshelf, a computer stand, a light shade that captures that spirit. If you don't, then why are you obsessed by? You know, before I went to architecture school, I didn't know I was wanting to be an architect. In my bedroom with my brother, my poor brother, the things I experimented on, my dad put carpet on the floor, right? Quite nice. I mean, my dad would have been a great architect. He turned out an engineer, but I think he would have made a really great, especially corporate architect, because he's very, very good at that sort of thing. So in my room, it was nice gray carpet with black timber cabinets. one day I said, oh, it's very boring, this thing. I want to like do something interesting, right? So I started by taking a pot of paint, black paint. I started painting my blinds, you know, that kind of louver blinds. I started painting them. And then halfway through, the bucket fell, no, on the carpet, splashed like that. So instead of trying to clean it, I was like, hey, actually quite nice, right? Then I spray more. Then my brother came back, I was like, what? There's a patch of paint on my carpet in the middle. But then it became damn cool, because it's like a puddle of paint. And then it did something to the car. So like this kind of thing, it will manifest itself. So let it manifest itself. Don't let yourself get consumed by social media and consumed by entertainment. Most of us just do that. And our minds can get very soft because of that. Do it as an outlet, but don't do it as your main thing. Okay?
I think that's very good advice, because when you graduate and you want to get into a good firm, I think having a good portfolio is a given, because there are many people who have good portfolio. I think most good firms will look for that something extra. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, good.
Okay, so this, I wouldn't say this is really a question, but it's just more of like, maybe like, I want to hear like, what's your opinion on it? Will you say that grades, especially in design school, is that really the most important? Because right now, I would say for most of my classmates and myself, you know, we're in school right now, and in a way, we are being, like, in a way, a grade is being put on our works. So will you say that that academics can in a way kill our passion for design? Because right now, you know, we're all in school, and you know, the most important thing is essentially the GPA and the grade that we get. But then, so in a way, we are all unconsciously trying to tweak our design just to maybe get an A grade, or maybe like a B, or even just pass. So in a way, will you say that this whole process kind of kills like our, like what makes our design original in a way? Yeah.
It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's okay, from your question, although you say it's not a question, I think I already sense that you feel you're being pushed to do things to achieve a grade. You're talking about from design class, right? You're not talking about the other classes. Just the main module, right? Yeah, same for me. I mean, yours is a liberal arts based, like you have multiple classes on top of design, right? Not so many, okay. But nonetheless, I was from a liberal arts base in the States, where I had all kinds of classes like philosophy, Japanese literature, whatever you wanted to do. And then obviously there was design, but design formed the bulk of it. And design is the hardest to get an A in, because it's completely subjective, right? Your right is my wrong. Especially if you're wanting to provoke, and in a way which may seem like it defies the conventions of beauty, composition, even function. And for sure, in provocations, there will be failed experiments. That's the nature of it, right? There's no way you can be obsessed and provoke, or obsessed by anything and always only succeed if you're wanting to push boundaries. So I understand your conundrum. I can answer this two ways. I'll talk about my personal perspective first, and then I'll talk about, let's say, maybe Singapore's and your school's perspective. So for me personally, it was never an issue, because what I was pushing, I had patrons in my lecturers. They were people who understood what I was doing, maybe also because I was able to articulate it. So maybe that's one key thing that you need to take away. In order to get a good grade, it's not about just good work or conventional work that tutors and lecturers can immediately identify. But if you want to do something different, and I did some different stuff in school, you need to create a foundation and a backdrop and a context for someone to understand what you're doing, for them to be able to assess you well. So if, let's say, you didn't give them a context, and you came out of a house, right, that was like no other house before, got broken this, water coming through that, I mean intentionally, all of it, right, uncomfortable spaces, but then you explain it very poorly, or you have not built up either body of reading or references which seem to substantiate what you're doing, or relevance for why what you're doing is important in the context of Singapore or otherwise, then why should anyone give you an A? They're not saying, oh, I reward you for your weirdness, huh? This is not a degree in weirdness, no. This is a degree in interior design, right? Or diploma in interior design, and it must be relevant still. So, point to note, pushing boundaries, encouraged. Establishing why those boundaries should be pushed and getting patrons to buy in is also important. It's a bit like me. If I was smarter then for the Sentosa Cove house, I wouldn't have gone up to the poor rich guy with conventional taste and show him this house straight away, right? You know what I've done? I would say, hey, Mr. XYZ, let's take a drive at night. Then I'll drive him through the neighborhood of the rich people, right? Then I'll say, hey, you see, all the curtains are drawn. Inside, I wonder what it's like for them. Not nice, right? Then he'll say, yeah, not nice, Colin, not nice. And I say, hey, why if we try and do something different? Oh, then suddenly I set the ground up for that. But what did I do? I was like, wow, some enthusiastic young architect, third house ever designed. Wow, this idea he surely like, because it's so mind-blowing. What happened to the poor guy? Totally caught off guard. No idea what I'm talking about. His only response is to say, oh, reject, because I just don't know what's going on here. So, if you did that, so I had patrons, but maybe because I also had A, patrons who understood the context I was working in, but B, I also tried to articulate the reasons and relevance of why I was doing what I was doing, but then get buy-in first. So you have a long runway, right? Your projects are not like assigned today, pass up tomorrow, right? It's months, especially for your senior thesis, it's months. Establish a connection, get buy-in, work on it, push that, and then the grades should show for themselves. Yeah. I graduated top of my class, not grade-wise. There were people with better grades than I, but they had it's a faculty vote, and I was voted top of the class. And it wasn't because my grades were the highest. There were people with perfect, can you imagine in architecture school, 5 years, multiple courses, perfect 4.0. How do you even do that? Insane, right? But they didn't get the top of the class award. I did it because my work pushed something, and also I was very involved in other multiple aspects of the school's culture and ecosystem, which I think the lecturers really appreciated. And I was friends with a lot of them. In fact, some of them asked me to house sit for them while they traveled. Yeah, so it was that kind of relationship. So don't treat your lecturers as someone to please and behold. Treat them as people who are collaborators and partners. Yes, they hold the grading fate in their hands, but they are partners. And if you lead together the right way in agreement, I think the outcome will be much more assured.
Just want to add a little bit more to the grade thing, because I think we have a few tutors here would probably agree with me also. I think there's a very clear difference between a good work and a bad work. So a lot of times it is the work that speaks for itself. At the end of the day, you are graded based on that, right? But what we see in a lot of students is that who are too great concern, they come up with a design and then they try to tweak it according to, what the tutor say, or, what would make me a better grade or whatever. But that is not the right way to go. I always tell my students that design for yourself, not for me. I'm here to, as what Colin said, provoke you, make you think, tell you what is good, what is bad about the scheme, what is right, what is wrong, if there's a better way to do it and all that. But at the end of the day, you're doing this for yourself, and that's the obsession that Colin talked about. You must have the passion to want to design well something, right? And we can see that also you see, that's why studio is important. For students who are really passionate, we see them coming out iterations after iterations. They don't give up. They keep on trying and they keep on exploring. For those who are grade obsessed, the first design they come up with, they tweak a bit. The final design is still just a slightly better version than the first one. But the person who's going to get an A is probably the person who has tried 10 different schemes. And this is very clear for a tutor. Sometimes, as a student, maybe you don't see everyone, but we see everyone and we can immediately identify the students who are really passionate and really put in the work, and the students who were just being strategic. So unfortunately in school, a lot of times grade is not just, the work is most important, but there's also your attitude, your attendance, your, different things, right? So yeah, so I think the answer is really that you're in the design school. You choose to come and study design for a reason, right? That's why you're not in accountancy, you're not in marketing. You come to design because you love it. On some level, right, you love it. So just be passionate and do it for yourself. Do things that you think is good, and I don't think you'll go that wrong. Okay. Okay. So any other questions? Yeah. Good.
I just wanted to ask about, when do you think is the right time to start your own firm? I mean, after what years of experience, and when's that realization that, yeah, I can finally start a firm?
The question was, when do you know it's the right time to go out on your own, firm-wise? I think it's a very, very, very difficult question to answer. But from what I can observe from running my own firm, it's probably a combination of a couple of things. The first is, it's not an inevitable given. It's not a destiny to run your own firm. And running your own firm, in as much as there's joy in being able to call the shots and name it after whatever you want to name it, and not have to answer to a boss per se, the reality is there's always a boss to answer to, and that's the client. It doesn't change when you run your own firm. And there's also the reality of having to juggle all those other things that I talked about, and they're incredibly time-consuming and difficult to do well. Not difficult to do, but difficult to do well. So I would say that a certain sense of maturity is probably needed in an ideal world. You may or may not know when the right time is. It could be just a desire, and then you try it, you may fail, but it's okay, then rejoin the industry. But I would say that probably the most critical thing is not how ready you are, but it's the motivation why. Like, why would you want to start your own firm versus work for someone? Maybe before, people didn't even ask themselves that. The only option was to work for someone. But today, you see many people, your seniors, young people, are starting their own firms and seem to do it quite successfully on the surface. But the motivations for why you want to do it, is it to wrestle creative independence back so that you have a voice? Is it because you are just born, I'm personally, right, born not to work under somebody. I'm a terrible employee, terrible. Yeah, every time I work for someone, it's been such a struggle. And I think because I have a really strong independent voice, and to always have a boss have to tell me what's right and what's wrong was very debilitating. It's not like I couldn't take it, but I went into this kind of weird shutdown mode, and I functioned very poorly, so I underperformed. So I'm not a very good employee. So the fact that there was an opportunity to start my own firm was a real blessing, although I didn't seek it out. So motivations for why, make sure it's the right one. Be mature enough to accept that it's going to be really difficult. And the last thing is have a reality check. Starting your own firm, what does that mean? Is there an opportunity, are there opportunities out there for you that are so uniquely right for you that it warrants you starting your own firm? For me, it was because someone gave me a fairly large hotel project to do, which would see us through for quite a while. And that was a good premise for beginning. But if there's really no economic or business development opportunities out there, why are you doing it? So there are many, many factors, right? But if, let's say, you're motivated, you can't work for someone, but there are no opportunities, there's no real advantage for you going out there because, you know, it's not as if you have a unique point of view or someone is feeding you work a particular way, then what's the point? Yeah. So it's a series of both internal as well as just reality check reasons, yeah. And I'm assuming, goes without saying, I'm assuming that by the point you ask yourself this question, you would have experienced enough and have gained enough wherewithal in terms of the many aspects of running a firm to even contemplate doing it. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just wrap the session with one last question. Students are always stuck all the time. So what do you do when you're stuck, and what's your advice to the students who are stuck? Like design, then I just can't go on, I'm stuck. I don't know how to start, or I don't know how to carry on from here. Yeah, stuck in design.
How many of you are perpetually getting stuck in design? Like you find it more often than not? Come on, be honest, raise your hand. You know, because I'm going to ask all the others to just leave the room because they don't need to hear, right? So all those who don't raise your hand, just leave the room now. I'm just kidding. Okay, but could you talk about how you feel when you're stuck, or what makes you stuck? Anybody? What are some of the key things, like what makes you get stuck? Like it's so good already, don't know what to do? Is it? Oh yeah, like what? Okay, gentleman over there. Okay, so in your case, as opposed to, let's say, you're just developing a typical floor plan and then you get stuck, right? They're two different scenarios altogether, because the kind of stuck you're talking about is really a creative conundrum which is born out of a process that is not that simple. I've undertaken in school, obviously I don't work like this anymore professionally, but I had, in school there were a couple of these where we were asked to go to the site. It was very refreshing for me and kind of strange, and some of my classmates didn't take too well to it, but we asked to go to the site, pick debris, like whatever objects, and then assemble it like a collage, and then outline it, and then start generating things with it. And some people were like, my brain just does not work like that. I cannot think, like, I must be like, what's the program? How many people are going to use it? What's the function? So is that kind of process right or wrong? I would say in school, it's the lagi best time to try different ways of creating design. And if you struggle with it, still commit. And in this case, there's someone who initiated this program, right? Probably a lecturer or something. Speak to them about it. It's like, what in the precedent studies we did, or the reference case study that this was inspired by, what did they do? How did they approach this? So talk about it. Dig into the precedent process, because you didn't come up with this out of thin air, right? Someone did this somewhere before. In my case, because my favorite drawing is the plan. I'm not great with sections and elevation. I love the plan. The plan to me everything comes alive. So what I did was my collage then became the plan of the building, and I could immediately see, because I love how people experience space, transitions, thresholds, etc. I could see how people will already use it for that particular, but for us there was a program. Is there a program for yours? Like, what is the program? Yeah, but what is the architecture program? Is it a school? Is it a what? Okay, so then you got to define what the digital nomad space is lah. So for ours, it was a cultural space of some sort, and mine happened to be a library. So I then knew how people would use a space, or at least I wanted to test some ideas of how people would use a library space, and then the collage, I could start seeing things. So for me, it was a plan. For you, that drawing may be a detail, right? Because that drawing isn't confined to one particular thing. That drawing could be a provocation of a detail. It could be, for some of you, a section. Oh, I noticed that this overlaps with that very interestingly. Maybe that interstitial space could be important. So A, there's no one fixed way of proceeding. But B, if you're not interested in anything at all, or you don't see the world in your particular obsession or filter, then what to do? You have to have some interest that pushes you lah, right? So the worst thing for being stuck, right, is two things. One, to just keep hammering at it that particular way. Change tack, change angle, change perspective to unstick yourself. Secondly, if time permits, just step away for a bit, half a day, a few hours, do something that just relaxes you. And then obviously engage with the person who created this exercise, or if you know the premise of it, understand it better to see precedents. And it's no shame to follow precedents in terms of process, not outcome. So if let's say they did that next, you also do that next, but what is that next? Same as them doing that next step precisely. They say they translate it to a plan. You also translate to a plan, but your plan will be very different from theirs, right? But do it anyway, and then see what outcome. And always be very sentient about what you're doing, and change tact when it's not turning out well. So that's for that more, let's say, complex process. But if you're talking about getting stuck, if you're doing a layout of a toilet or layout of a living room, that one's much simpler. It's all about ergonomics and experience. What are you trying to achieve? Very easy to define. What are you trying to achieve? Privacy, openness? Are you trying to achieve integrated multifunctional space? Are you trying to achieve isolated functions that you have to go to different corners to do? And then once you are very clear about what you're trying to achieve, then to get there, either you're not skilled enough, ask a friend. Maybe you happen to be a bit of a down moment. We all get that, right? Creative block, I get it, do you? Right? Then just turn to a friend. Like my number two, because I let the teams through directorial direction work very independently, and I review stuff and sort of say this can get better or not. Very much like your lecturer's role. It's not her project, right? It's yours. And I treat that like that too. It's my team's project, it's not mine. But every once in a while they'll get stuck. And instead of showing me results, they'll say, hey, you know, Colin, could we do a workshop call because we are a bit stuck right now? And usually from a third person's point of view and someone who's also a bit more experienced, I can come in and say, this is why you're stuck. And then I won't give the solution, I say, this is why you're stuck. And then they go, oh, okay. And then they find a solution. So do that, find your sounding board. In this room of 100 over people, there must be someone who you think, hey, that's my go-to, you know, in cases like that.
Thank you so much. So next time, if you are stuck, please. Oh, there's one final question. Would you take it? Yeah. Okay. Let's have one final one.
Firstly, thank you for taking your time to come here and talk to us this morning. So my question is, I was quite interested in your background of undergraduate studies in the America. I want to know, like, is there a thinking or a philosophy that the college taught you that could be applied to the art students, design students here in Singapore, or vice versa, like something that is unique among Singaporean students that could also be applied to the West? This question is based because I was lucky enough to work under both an Italian bosses and like Singaporean bosses, and I did find there was a dichotomy, a contrast in the way that there was that they think about design. Sorry. It was more. He was more like open to my ideas, whereas I'm not I'm not trying to be generalizing, but my Singaporean boss, he was a bit more, let's say, constricting and kind of micromanagers and whatnot when it comes to what I was doing, and I just thought, like, is it based on the ideologies between the East and the West, like how like can be, you know, mitigated, an approach when we actually go into the workforce and experience different bosses. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, it was wise for you to say you're not wanting to generalize just from these two, you know, very personal instances. But if we don't reduce it to, let's say, Western versus Asian culture, there are essentially a couple of types of studios that we talked about, right? Where there's some where it's very top-down, potentially because that studio has already a very clear vision. So like, let's say you look at MOD, we have a clear approach but not vision. Like, we have a clear process but not vision. Like, our projects, I showed you a variety of them. They don't really have the same outcome. They don't look the same. But there are certain studios where the outcomes are very much the obsession of the director, and he wants all the work generated from that film to replicate that. Is that right or wrong? That's fine, right? It's for him to decide. In terms of micromanaging versus, let's say, more open-ended, it probably suits the nature of the work more if you're a firm that is a little looser in terms of your, let's say, aesthetic outcomes, to run it more openly and more freely, and to invite conversations and discourse. So you can almost tell already. Now, is there something underlying Asian versus Western? Probably, right? I mean, the Western, where I went to school, it was less about a certain formula for success. I mean, the whole liberal arts basis encourages a little bit more looseness around the edges and ambiguity. Whereas if you're very discipline specific, you tend to be a lot more focused and narrow. So yes, there is inherently a difference. And let's say an Asian boss who may have been brought up or been exposed to working for global firms versus the local ones may also be different. But do you find local practitioners who are also very open-minded? Of course you do. So there's probably not, you know, a stereotype. Within the stereotypes, there are probably unique examples that exist. What I loved about where I went to school, so the culture and landscape of academia or the academic pursuit in the States and Singapore is primarily different because of scale. So like for instance, in Singapore, the number of design schools are a small handful. Because it's a small handful, you have to prepare your graduates for the profession in almost a similar way, because you aren't able to have a super particular voice, because if you are too left field or right field alone and not balanced, then your graduates may not be so suitable because the market's also smaller. But in the States, you have 200, 300, 400 schools, 500, maybe for design, architecture there are that many, but design maybe even more, which means you can afford to be a bit unique in your approach and style of education. Because the market's bigger, the number of people who can hire you are more, you can probably find a niche somewhere if you are that unique. So by and large, therefore, there's a little bit more sense of conformity because there's a certain product to push out. However, in LASALLE, from what I can tell, being a critic here and also knowing some of your lecturers, there's already a much broader way of approaching design and freer way of doing it than, you know, your prescribed way. So I think you're already in a very good hybrid condition.
Thank you so much, Colin, for spending 2 hours of your precious morning with us. Thank you guys for coming. I really hope that you all enjoy this lecture. And as you know, there are a few more to come. Hope to see you guys again. And so big round of applause for Colin Seah. So he's still here if you want to come up and shake his hand and say hi, and so that next time he can hire you. Okay, thank you guys.
Shameless.